I am happy to see so many of you joining today, and I really hope and believe that you will be inspired by the three interesting presentations we will hear today. Also, I would like to say that this work is funded by the European Climate Foundation. So just a quick run through the program for today. After a short introduction by me to this briefing paper we have made, Building for the Future, Why EU Member States Must Take Ambitious Steps in Implementing the Whole Life Carbon Requirements in the EPBD, I will present the three speakers. First, Harpa Birgisdottir, who is a professor at the Department of the Built Environment at Aalborg University, will talk about why ambitious limit values are important for the built environment. Afterwards, Aalborg Østerbye from the Danish Authority of Social Services and Housing will tell some learnings from the Danish implementation of the whole life carbon requirements. Lastly, Andreas Sattrup from the construction company NCC, who is head of green transition. He will talk about why ambitious limit values are important for the construction industry. And as you might notice, we have some a bit funny time slots because we had a late cancellation yesterday because of illness. So luckily, Andreas Sattrup said yes on a very short notice to have this last talk. And he is in a meeting finishing at 11:45, so he will jump right into this at 11:46, we hope. So hopefully it will all end up good. Fingers crossed. So just a short introduction to this area. As most probably know, the building sector in the EU is responsible for a very high amount of EU's total CO2 emissions, around 36%. And today we started talking about this whole life carbon expression, where early on we talked about the operational carbon, which is used in when the building is in use. But since we expect these carbon emissions to decrease through efficiency improvements, the embedded carbon becomes more and more important to also include in the calculations for carbon emissions. So now this whole life carbon has been introduced, and several member states have already introduced regulations nationally. And from May last year, it was also incorporated in the revised EPBD in EU. But it's very important to note that only a full potential will be realized through ambitious national implementation in the EU member states. In Denmark, and I'm sure this will be put in more words by both Harpa and Aalborg at least, but in May 2020, Denmark introduced a test phase for a voluntary sustainability class. And this came after a lot of calculations and data collection had been done at maybe especially Aalborg University and with Harpa involved in this work. So a lot of knowledge was already ready. So in this phase, developers tested the sustainability requirements on specific new constructions, renovations, and transformations. Already, not even a year after, a roadmap for reducing limit values was presented in the Danish National Strategy for Sustainable Constructions. And that is what we have a picture of here, where the first row for 2023 shows the first limit value that was introduced on 12 kilogram CO2 per square meter per year. When this roadmap was presented, it was also agreed politically that every second year these numbers should be revised, or the strategy should be reviewed. Already in 2024 there was a revision, and at the same time there was a mobilization in the construction industry, because they found actually the limit values too unambitious. One argument was that an average new building in Denmark emits 9.5 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year, and the current limit value introduced was 12 kilograms per CO2 per square meter per year. And as seen in the previous slide, for 2025, the next limit value, 5 kilograms, actually higher than the average new building in Denmark. So more than 600 stakeholders from the Danish building and construction sector signed up for more ambitious limit values. And they actually backed a call to lower the limit values to 5.8 CO2 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year in 2025. And this was a number taken from the reduction roadmap 2.0, where they pointed into the Paris Agreement. And this mobilization really shows that the industry already have so many of the solutions. So the end was that there was agreement on a limit value at 7.1 kilograms CO2 per year, per square meter per year, which will be incorporated in July 2025. And thus this is more ambitious than the national strategy for sustainable construction from 2021. And it's actually also very close. If you see the lower line, it's very close to the limit value of 7 kilogram CO2 for the voluntary sustainability class. So we have some overall recommendations to an ambitious implementation in member states. Data is a crucial factor, and I'm sure Harpa will put more words to this. It's important to initiate the uptake of the national roadmap immediately and not wait for the deadlines possible. This has several member states shown is actually possible. Also, it's a good idea to include a voluntary sustainability class, which can introduce a carrot for developers to choose more ambitious paths. And also, it's important to make reused building materials and recycled building materials count for zero in the calculations. So it also is preferable to use these materials. And also the whole life carbon regulation can be considered a lever for more circularity, as when these limit values decreases over years, it will intensify the use of more sustainable and reused and recycled materials. And then also overall, we should renovate existing buildings rather than building new ones. So with this short introduction, I will give the word to Harpa Birgisdottir, who will tell us why ambitious limit values are important for the built environment. And Harpa, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation and introduction. And now I'm going to make sure that all the technical things go right. Let's see if you have my presentation.
Yes, it looks perfect.
But as presentation, or is it?
Just the presentation mode, and then.
Yes, no, it's there.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about why ambitious limit values are important for the built environment. And there's a lot to say here, but I need to try to be short and clear. Yeah, we all know that we have an urgent environmental challenge, and that regards climate. It regards more broader our total environment. Here we can look into the planetary boundaries and also the use of resources. So we know about urgent climate challenge, and this has been told to us for many, many years in report after report after report from the IPCC, and telling us and giving us ideas about the different scenarios that we are looking into in regarding to the climate challenge. And all here is, of course, about that we have to limit our release of greenhouse gas emissions and the amount of the different, and we see different scenarios for our future, depending on how well we do this. I know we all know this, but I just want to set the scene. We also have more than only greenhouse gas emissions to look into. And here we often work with the planetary boundaries and see, look at that. We have to keep our emissions and our impacts on planet Earth within safe operating space. And the situation now is that 6 out of 9 boundaries are exceeded. And many of them are very much far exceeded. In terms of resources, there are different ways of looking into this, but one of this is the measurement of Earth overshoot day. And that tells us a little bit about how our use of resources is exceeding our annual share if we wanted to have a sustainable use of resources. In Denmark, the Earth overshoot day was last year on March 16th, and it was 12 days earlier than last year. So there is no doubt about the urgency and therefore why we need to look into ambitious limit values when it comes to buildings. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have been doing in Denmark. And in Denmark, we are among one of the few countries that already now has limit values on the greenhouse gas emissions from new construction. And as was told earlier, we also have quite there was a push for much more ambitious levels and so on. But as I will also show you a little bit later, so although we believe and see that we have set some legislation that is challenging to work with, it is still not enough in order to meet, for example, the Paris Agreement. And we have some studies that shows that for example, the limit value of 12 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year that came in 2023 and is still valid until the mid of this year, that is exceeding the budget of the construction sector, as we can calculate that, for meeting the Paris Agreement with up to 220%. So that is why ambitious limit values is a big need for that. And I have decided with the time limit, I have to focus on some examples from the data and the climate impacts of new construction in Denmark and to look into, the limit values in terms of the climate impacts of new constructions as we see it from cases in Denmark. So I'll focus on Danish cases. And we have been focusing a lot on gathering knowledge on the climate impacts of buildings. And this started earlier, but we have this report from 2020, and it has been also translated to English in 2021, where we made this study of whole life carbon assessment of 60 new constructions at this time. And the purpose of this study was to establish sufficient data background on climate impact of buildings in Denmark over the life cycle, with the purpose of being possible to develop reference values or limit values later on, because the limit values then came with the strategy that Lone just described earlier. And just to very, very quickly, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with that we have the life cycle of buildings, and that is divided into modules and phases and modules. And in our starting point in Denmark, we have simplified a bit, so we don't cover all modules according to the standard EN 15978, but we are increasingly increasing the phases and the modules that we are, or the modules that we are including. So here, starting in the study that we worked for on the 60 cases, we have a simplified scope of the modules included, but covering the whole life cycle. And we are calculating for a 50 years reference study period for the buildings, because then you see the results of these 60 cases. So if we look at the 60 cases that we calculated some years ago, and these are different kind of buildings, and of course in the report you will see all the details of that. But when you calculate this for 50 years, and we then sum it up into kilograms CO2 per square meter per year over this 50 years, we can see that the results of those cases, they were like from a little bit above 6 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year and up to about 14. And what we also saw here was that with the data and the assumption and what we have in Denmark, then around 25% of the emissions over the 50 years were coming from operational energy in the buildings, and 75% from embodied. And that is due to also, of course, transition to more use of renewable energy in our energy grid in Denmark. And from that, and I'm sure Albert will tell more about that, then from the National Strategy for Sustainable Construction, a limit value was set of 12 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year, and the voluntary one of 8, and which was also mentioned earlier. But here it was based on that around 10% of the cases that we calculated could not fulfill the limit value. But of course, here we also knew that at that time there was not much knowledge about how to do LCA for buildings and so on. So we have to know that we have an urgency and we need to decrease, but we also need to make sure that the building sector now knows how to work with this. But in our research institute, we have, of course, made a lot of different studies on how to, what are the possibilities to reduce the climate impacts of buildings. And I'm not going to mention many, but I'm going to mention one study that we had, which was the housing construction from 4 to 1 planet. And that was like trying to reduce our emissions from using resources like we have 4 planet Earths available to 1, and simplifying a bit, like going from this around 10 kilograms CO2 per square meter a year to 2.5. Is that possible? And well, at that time we thought, okay, that is, far from what we can do. But also, again, just quickly to the results. So of this report that is available in English, is that the gray ones are like the conventional cases, and the green-blue ones are the 24 cases that we were looking into in this study. And here we could see examples of residential buildings built in Denmark with much lower climate impacts. So like the median of our standard cases is around 10.8, while the median values of the best practice was 6.2. And you can see examples of some cases that are around 3 and 4 kilograms CO2 per year. So clearly showing that it is possible to build differently. And as was mentioned also earlier, is that now we go back to the limit values that we have in Denmark, and our task has been to provide, to conduct analysis and provide with results that can be used to set the limit value. And we did the 60 cases to prepare for the first limit value in 2023. And then we also started another study to prepare for the limit value of 2025. This report is only available in Danish, but we have also, of course, there is an English summary in it, and we have some research papers that are related to this. But here we have gathered much more data than we had earlier when we started with the 60 cases, and now we have around a little bit less than 300 cases available. You can see a huge range here from the best practice of a little bit less than 3 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year. But you can also see many cases of up to, some cases with much higher emissions and higher than 12 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year. But that is because we also have had these tasks to study much more also, or study buildings that have specific requirements and really need actually, maybe not all these emissions, but there are some specific needs like hospitals, laboratories, and so on, that might need more materials, more strength, and so on. So this our case sample of cases of 300 cases covers both the best practice, the normal practice, and also buildings with special needs. But our task was to select the typical new construction in Denmark, and that is why we are sorting out from our cases, so the orange ones are the ones that we have chosen for covering as representative cases for climate impacts in Denmark. And here we have the results that we show, like I showed you earlier, again, with now from 60 to 163 cases, but still a range from 6 to around 14 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year. So actually the range is the same, although we have a lot of many new cases here, but also new data. And I'm sure maybe you can see that now actually we have around 90% of our emissions for the 50 years reference study period coming from embodied, and only around 10% from the operational energy. And here we have new data and new political agreements and so on operational energy that is taking into account in our calculations. Yeah, but now since we also have more cases, we can also divide this into building types, different building types. And I'm sorry that I didn't translate this to English, but it's starting with single family homes, and then with multifamily homes, then with row houses, and then we have offices and so on. So we also have better data knowledge of at least of the first 4 building types. And then what happened was the political discussions and so on that was introduced earlier, and the pressure from the reduction roadmap and so on. And the limit values that we got was on average going from 12 to 7.1. But you can see also here how they have been divided into different building types. So with single family houses having limit value of 6.7, for example, and multi-dwellings of 7.5. And you can see the lines showing around where the limit values are set compared to what we have of cases. So at least here the limit values that we will have from 2025 will be quite challenging compared to, for the building sector, compared to how they have been used to build. And back to the question, why ambitious limit values are important for the built environment. And, you remember all this, what you mentioned before, so there's no question about that. And what is quite important for us to start looking into, so how far are our limit values in the building code from the CO2 budget that we would have for the Paris Agreement? We have committed us to absolute targets, for we are going to be net zero emissions or climate neutral emissions in not that far future. And we have committed ourselves to the Paris Agreement. And that is why we also make some studies where we look into, okay, what is needed to work if we have the Paris Agreement and to fulfill that. And there we have only limited budget that we can work with. And this is a study comparing where we should be on the roadmap if we want to fulfill the Paris Agreement, the green and the blue ones. And the red one is where the political agreements that were made in year 2021, and that is where we can calculate that or analyze that our the limit values that we had set in 2021 with 12 and 10.5 and so on were exceeding the Paris Agreement with 220%. But of course now we are getting a bit closer. And other studies also showing us that we have very large variation between the conventional practice and the best practice that I have been introducing. So this is, again, based on the cases that they've been showing you, and there's a link to, journal papers where this has been analyzed. But you can see row houses, so the best practice and the conventional practice, there is, and the same for multifamily houses and single family houses, there is quite large difference here between the best practice and the conventional practice. And just lastly, we have also tried to calculate, use all these calculations to calculate the whole life carbon from a large share of new construction in Denmark. So this is not having all the new constructions in Denmark, but based on the data that I presented to you, and make some scenarios for how we are going to build our new how much new buildings there will be in the future from, until the year 2050. And here you could see how our median values from business as usual was, so we are calculating this in around 2.8 million tons of CO2 in Denmark in year 2024. And then, as you can see, go on. But we have a large variation because if it's being built according to the highest level of emissions that we have or lowest emissions. But then when we see the effects of putting the limit values, and now we have limit values set for 2023, 25, 27, and 29. And of course, we don't know how ambitious it will be in the future. We can see a huge impact, of course, if in lowering the emissions from construction by having those limit values. And the last one showing the scenarios, how the emissions of the buildings are expected to be after having limit values. But what is, of course, quite important for us to know is that we are still not getting the construction industry, more needs to be done to get down to a climate neutral building sector. So, and just lastly, we've been talking a lot about limit values, and they are usually in square meter building, kilogram CO2 per square meter building per year. We need to talk about our consumption of space, the use of square meters. In Denmark, for example, just an example, the average detached house has been grown from 120 to 213 square meter. So a huge increase in our consumption of space. So therefore, ambitious limit values are very important. They are crucial, but the limit values can't solve this alone. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Harpa. It was very interesting, and it really did put words on what I just shortly mentioned. in the first presentation. We got a question in the chat, and maybe Harpa, you could be so kind just to ask to answer her in the
In
chat.
the chat, yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, I will do that.
Rush on to Albert Østerbye, who is ready.
Thank you so much, Luna.
Danish Authority of Social Services and Housing. So go ahead, Albert.
Let's see if I can manage to share my slides.
It looks like.
Do you have them in presentation mode?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Luna, for the invitation, and thank you so much for hosting this webinar. I think it's a very great opportunity to share some crucial knowledge on this very important subject. First, I will introduce the existing political agreements, which introduced the whole life carbon requirements in Denmark. Next, I will elaborate on the main points from the new and more ambitious agreements. And lastly, I will tell you a bit on the learnings from Denmark. But well, first of all, the original political agreement was a part of the Climate Act of 2022, which was passed by the Danish government with broad support from other parties within the Danish parliament. Sorry. And it sets goal for Denmark to reduce the total CO2 emissions by 70% in 2030 compared to the 1990 baseline level. And the political agreement called the National Strategy for Sustainable Construction, among other things, set a limit value, as Harpa also mentioned, of 12 kilo CO2 emissions per square meter per year for big buildings over 1,000 square meters. And the agreement also required that smaller buildings, smaller than 1,000 square meters, had to document the climate impact through a life cycle assessment. And additionally, the agreement also focused on promoting climate-friendly building materials and also the need for better data of construction materials as EPBDs, as an example. So, yeah, a key part also of the political agreement was to engage the industry. And therefore, in 2021, we also set down a coordination, a committee for sustainable construction with stakeholders from the industry, including also Build actually and Green Transition Denmark. And the purpose of the committee is to discuss the strategy and ensure that the initiatives are embedded in the relevant professional environments. Yeah, I would have elaborated a bit more on what phases and modules that are included in the Danish whole of carbon requirements. But as Harpa just has presented these, I will just rush further, but just mention that actually we also had a smaller additional political agreement from 2023 that promoted the recycled products, saying that these should only be counted as 0 kilo CO2 throughout the whole life carbon, so that we will have more recycled products in construction, because right now it's very limited to a couple percent maybe. So the new agreements, first of all, the intention of the new agreement was to speed up the green transition of the construction sector by introducing some additional measures to limit the construction's whole life carbon footprint. Firstly, the new agreement tightens the CO2 emissions, the CO2 limit value from July 2025. And the political agreement, as Harpa also mentioned, is based on the percentage of buildings that needs to perform better, meaning, of course, a change of construction practices. And this is of course based on the study that was made by Harpa and her colleagues of around 300 representative cases, and of course also there are whole life carbon calculations. In the original agreement, it was proposed that the revised limit for 2025 should be set at a level where every third building needed to perform better compared to the 2021 baseline. But with the new agreement, as you see, more than 4 or 5 buildings need to perform better. So in other words, I would say that it's actually a quite significant and also a quite ambitious limit value compared to, of course, the original agreement. As Lone also briefly mentioned in the beginning, it should be noted that actually with this more ambitious limit value, of course, among other reasons, was actually caused by political pressure from the construction stakeholders or the industry itself, which of course also actually to some aspect differentiates the construction industry from other industries who are facing new environmental regulation. So yeah, so great praise to them. That was really impressive actually. Within the political negotiations, it was also noted that the CO2 emissions for certain types of buildings were not the same, and some had a very low CO2 emissions, and therefore it was decided to differentiate the limits so that the types of buildings with the greatest potential to reduce emissions also had a strong initiative to do so, and also it was a political rationale to ensure that all building types contributed to the reduction of CO2 emissions. Yeah, and in the scheme you'll find the new limit values for the new roadmap. And as you see, as an example, holiday homes under 150 square meters have a very small and low limit value, since these are only used normally only used in the summer period, and therefore they don't have as much isolation and so on. So it's easier for them to meet a lower limit value compared to, as an example, apartment buildings, which have more stores, of course, and therefore they also need more materials. Yeah. In the new agreement, we also covered much more of the entire building stock under the new whole life carbon requirements. First of all, the former limit of 1,000 square meters was removed, and also furthermore new types of buildings, such as I mentioned, holiday homes, unheated storage facilities, parking structures, larger extensions of buildings were also subject to the new whole life carbon requirements. And the expansion of new types of buildings aims to ensure that particular households and also public housing didn't bear too much of the financial burden of the green transition or within construction and the building stock in total, so that the cost of reducing CO2 emissions are spread out more evenly, at least compared to the former political agreements. Yeah, and secondly, also of course, it was also aimed that the total reduction of CO2 emissions should be increased by expanding the scope. I think it's also worth noting that we have made some new exemptions, also as Harpa mentioned, because there are some special building types that are crucial for the infrastructure, as hospitals, and they require some exemptions from the new demands, since as well that functions would not be able to, or they would not be able to function the way that was intended. But still, they have to document the whole life carbon. Yeah, as a new thing in the new political agreements, we also include the construction process. And it has got an independent limit value, as you will see. I'll just find the right slide. It has an independent limit value of 1.5 kilo CO2 per square meter per year in 2025, and also, of course, that will also be tightened in the next couple of years. And the level was set so that approximately 50% of the construction processes needed to perform better compared to the 2021 level. And also, since we have like an independent limit value for the construction process, the reductions actually have to come from the construction processes, and you can't be able to, let's say, borrow a reduction from other phases to meet the overall limit value. So the whole political rationale, of course, of the new political agreement is to change the way that we build. And of course, there will most likely be some changes in the construction practices caused by the new limit values. We have been categorizing the new ways of construction into 4. Of course, we have some buildings which are under the limit value, and therefore they don't have to change anything. Then we have some small optimizations, which is between a reduction of 0 to 2 kilo CO2 per year. We have some that have what we call partly changes, which is between 2 and 4 kilo CO2 per year. And then we have some that needs to totally change the way that they build, which is above 4 kilo CO2 per year. In the figure to the right, and I'm sorry that the legend is in Danish, but you will see how many buildings that are expected to change the way that they build. And if you see the last 2 colors, it is seen that approximately 45 of the buildings of new buildings will need to either partly change the practices or totally change. And of course, this is a quite significant task for the entire construction industry to fulfill. And therefore, we also need some new competences and some new best practice cases. But also, we need to revise the existing building regulation in order to handle both the existing technical requirements as safety and health, but also the green transition of the building stock, which leads me to the next slide. The revision of the building regulation has 4 themes in it. And the first one is to make sure that we have the right balance between the technical requirements as safety and health and energy consumption, but making sure that these requirements goes hand in hand with the new limit values, so that it's possible to meet, let's say, the technical requirements of fire safety as well as the new limit value. As part of the new revision is also to adjust the energy requirements of conversion of existing buildings to ease a renovation and to make sure that we renovate more rather than just demolish and build new. I can see that I'm a little rushed, so what the next number 3 and 4 are also very crucial, but maybe that they don't necessarily are so important when talking about whole life carbon. So this is how we have implemented in Denmark. And I will just briefly run through what I think that all the member states could learn from this. First of all, you should be aware to clarify some special aspect of the LCA standard. Of course, the LCA standard is very fine and very useful for us to use, but it is not specifically targeting the whole life carbon requirements specifications in a national context. So as a result, many different national whole life carbon requirements could be formulated, but while using the CS standard, and therefore there are some aspects that you should be aware of. First of all, of course, you should consider what stages and modules that you should implement. Of course, the Delegated Act was coming as a part of the new EPBD Article 7 would probably, to some extent at least, elaborate on what modules and stages that should be used. But of course, you should also be aware of what data you have available and also your experiences. A whole life carbon calculation for the entire life cycle is a quite comprehensive task, and therefore we have also made some simplifications of certain models. As an example, transport does, like in regard of the standard, also account for the loss of materials from the construction site to from the production site to the construction site, and therefore, which is quite difficult to implement, and we don't have the necessary data, so we don't have that with us. And I can see Lone says I'm in a rush, so I think I will go to the next slide, maybe. Although I just have one thing on this very slide, I think is quite important, which is the last thing, that you need to address how you should address a changing energy system, because right now we have some emission factors saying that the B6 module should account for 2 kilos CO2 per year, but since the energy system is also facing a green transition, the emission factors are much lower now, and therefore in the new agreement, it only accounts for 0.8 kilos CO2 per year. I have one last slide, Lone. I will do it very quick. Yeah. I think the most crucial thing on this slide is to be aware of how you should handle mixed-use buildings. In Denmark, we have, as I said, like differentiated the limit value, but you have some buildings which is, let's say, 50% apartments, 50% stores. And in this sentence, we have agreed in Denmark to have an overall like average limit value for these buildings, saying that 50% of the building represents a building type of 10 kilos CO2, another 50% of the building represents a building type with 7 kilos CO2, then an average, of course, should be 8.5. Last but not least, I will recommend all my colleagues to have like a very close relationship with the industry, since it ensures that we share a crucial knowledge. We have the opportunity to test new ideas, and also it makes sure that we can embed the relevant like initiatives with the professional environments. So that was it for me. I'm sorry I went a little bit over time.
Thank you very much, Albert. It was very interesting, and thank you also for sharing these important lessons, which is really our idea for today's webinar, to share knowledge and inspire each other. So thank you so much. And yes, we are running a bit late, and now I can see also that Peter Andreas Sattrup from NCC has joined us. Thank you so much, Peter Andreas, on such a short notice. I'm very glad that you were willing to join.
Thank you very much.
I will just say that we might run a couple of minutes over time. The webinar is recorded, and it will be put on our webpage, so it's also possible to see it there if you miss the last part. So thank you, Peter. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I'll jump right into it. let's see. I hope this comes out correctly.
Yes. And then just...
There you go. All right. Thank you so much. And my name is Peter, and I'm head of green transition at NCC Denmark, which is a very large construction company in the Nordic region. And we constitute currently approximately 25% of the overall business, which is focused on the Nordic countries. And we have our headquarters in Stockholm. So a rather big company. And we not only build buildings, we also do property development. We produce gravel, stone materials, asphalt, and we also do infrastructure projects. So it's a big project. It's a big construction company with 4 different business areas. What we are very interested in is complex projects. The more complex, the better for us. And of course, when we talk about sustainability, that is another layer of complexity that we have to manage and help our clients execute on successfully. We work with this sustainability framework. My role is in the top 3 blocks of climate and energy, natural resources, biodiversity, materials, and circularity. But what is really the core of it is that as a business, we want to be data-driven. We want to provide expertise that will help us guide the construction process for our clients. So knowledge is really crucial, and this is also why we are very keen to use whole life carbon assessment methods in order to really be very precise about what is it that works, what is the effect of the solutions that we provide, and how can we find cost-efficient solutions for our clients. So data-driven is super important, knowledge is super important, and that is really what we're interested in. We have this overall business ambition to be climate neutral by 2045, a little bit ahead of time according to the EU targets. But in the short term, we want to reduce our climate footprint by roughly 50% before 2030, and that is really what is our short-term goal. So we really see sustainability and whole life carbon assessments as a core service that we provide to our clients. And we think that it's super important that we have this climate regulation in the Danish building code, because without it, it would be much more difficult to actually achieve our company goals. So having the regulation in place is really having a huge transformative effect on the entire construction industry. And that's also why we have actively supported that we, in the first place, got not only sort of the requirement to do the calculations, but that we actually have binding targets in the building code introduced by 2023. It makes a huge difference that we have implemented the targets already, because that means that the construction industry really knows that this is not just a communication or calculation exercise. It's not just a data reporting exercise. This is really something that we need to navigate through in our project development processes. The first goals were relatively, easy to achieve with traditional construction. So we were actually requesting that these targets be made more ambitious, because we felt that we could actually do much more if the requirements became a bit more tough than they were in the first place. And we actually joined basically all businesses, big, small, in this request for tightening the climate targets by 2025. What was of particular importance to us is that we could see that we actually began to do assessments of what are the impacts of the construction process and transportation of materials to site and on site, off site. And we could see that the impact of the construction process was actually in the same range as several decades of building operation, given that we, in the Danish context, have very tight operational energy use requirements for new construction. So we really lobbied quite hard, very directly with the government committee that we should include the construction process in it. I think, it's like ordinary construction processes where you don't do any optimization. That is in a similar range to 30, 40, 50 years of building operation in the Danish context. We do have some of the most demanding energy use requirements, so it might look different in other countries, but it is really significant and has been overlooked until now. So what we could see, and we knew this from beforehand from the energy targets that were implemented in 10 years ago, that once we have these requirements, it becomes really a transformative driver for change in the entire industry. And having these long-term targets that we know that there will be a reduction in carbon footprint required by the building code, not just for next year, but for the next 10 years, or in the Danish context, 7 years. That means that it becomes much more easy to actually direct the necessary investments in competence building, knowledge building, product development, and so on and so forth, because we have a long-term perspective. So that's really important. And having the targets also creates a market for competitive solutions once you can find the cost-efficient solutions, which is really what we think is our task. So in our company, we are in full swing implementing whole life carbon methodologies. We are informing all our business processes by whole life carbon assessments. And we are also in the process of changing our organization so that the knowledge that used to be a specialist knowledge in my team is actually getting spread out into all the production teams that we have within the company. And that is because we think that this is really a business opportunity, and we really look into harvesting the benefits of finding these low emission solutions. So to us, this is really a question of finding, of creating a market by these demands, and we think that this is it's really one of the beautiful ways that that regulation can create a market which enables competition. And if you're awake as a business, you would really just lean into this as a value proposition to your clients. So in that sense, I think that it has been a very good cooperation between industries which have requested these regulations to enable a market to actually to grow. And I think that the conversation between businesses and the government and institutions, research institutions, has been very fruitful, and that we see that this is really enabling change. So that's really my perspective on it.
Thank you so much, Peter and Andreas. Interesting also to hear it from the businesses. That was an important view as well. For all of you, I hope we just can have one last question is if you have a very specific recommendation for member states that not yet have started, what is the most important? Is it the collaboration between different stakeholders and institutions that you mentioned?
I think collaboration is really important because we need to know what is the long-term ambition. I think it's also important to one important point is that we've had the luck to have a free tool, lifecycle assessment tool, developed by a government institution with Aalborg University built. And having that as a free tool has really enabled that the threshold the threshold of access to market has become, easy. It's available to everyone. You can be a small business. You can just go and do it. And the competence using that tool it doesn't cost a lot to get going. So in that sense, I think access to tools, access to knowledge, access to data, building sort of industry-wide platforms, super important and very successful in the Danish implementation.
Thank you. So this could be very inspiring for the member states.
I can definitely recommend it.
Perfect. I just have one last slide to share. And then we will have to end today. So, yeah. So thank you all for joining. Fortunately, this work will continue in 2025 with a new funding from European Climate Foundation. We are very happy about that. And that following project aims to overcome existing barriers to whole life carbon adoption through targeted capacity building, stakeholder engagement, and sharing of best practices, ultimately driving substantial reductions in carbon emissions and resource consumption within the construction sector. That is the writing in the project. And that is, of course, an invitation to contact Green Transition Denmark. You can write my mail. You're very welcome to do that. And we can establish this collaboration to get further on this whole life carbon area and with the requirements. So with the hope for even more work in 2025 and more member states getting there, I will just thank you all for today and have a nice day. Thank you.